Oh my Lord, this bread is out of this world. Usually when you're doing a diet or cutting out a food group, it just sucks. My guest today is Tim Elias from GFU Kitchen in Austin. It's a gluten-free bakery that is out of this world. Let me be clear, this is not a bloody sacrifice. This is better than normal bread. Check out this episode for a tasty treat without all of that guilt and shame. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Eli. I appreciate it.
I absolutely love your bread. It is bloody fantastic. I'm excited to show our audience. Like, they've got to get your stuff. It's great.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. That's a compliment that I really enjoy hearing.
Introduce yourself.
Sure.
And like, let's say you went to a bar and you're like, go up to someone, like introduce yourself in a bar. How would you introduce yourself to them?
It's funny that you asked that question. I'm Tim Elias. I normally introduce myself as Timothy, but the funny thing is people always ask me if that's what I want them to call me.
Yeah.
But so it's just Tim or Elias is easy. Yeah. And so yeah, that's how I would introduce myself, as that, and possibly that I'm a baker. But yeah, it's pretty casual about it.
I love it. So tell me about like I said in the intro, your bread is, it's revelatory, because why is all bread not like at that level? I know that's a strange thing to say, but it's like, it's that much better that you're like, oh, is this what it's supposed to be like? And it's gluten-free.
Right.
And you have religious fanatic fans, which we'll probably see on the screen, and maybe some audio clips of that. Tell us about the business.
For sure. So I started this back in 2015, and it precedes that just because I was diagnosed with a really strange allergy. It's called exercise-induced anaphylaxis triggered by gluten. And so that basically means if my heart is elevated and I've eaten something that has flour, gluten, that my body goes into anaphylactic shock. I'd have a seizure, and then it would end fatally.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's really rare. I think it's really rare. I think it's more prevalent with shellfish. And back when I was diagnosed, there weren't really very many options in the gluten-free world. And
so did you avoid bread entirely?
I gave up everything bread. So pizza. I grew up in New York, so it was like pizza, Italian bread, cakes, right? Any sort of pastries, cookies. I mean, you name it. It was like hamburgers were like, I was eating protein style, what they call protein style, right? So like In-N-Out has protein style, so they just serve it to you on like maybe a bed of lettuce. But when I asked for it, I was always mocked and laughed at. It was like, people didn't understand. They were like, oh, Timmy's got an allergy, you know? So it was pretty funny. And I have tons of stories about that, like going to places to order food and just what would happen. But that's another story. So being that there wasn't very many options, and I had to go kind of cold turkey, right? So I gave up everything with wheat, everything with flour. I was told I had to give up chocolate. So I gave up chocolate for like 3 years. Yeah, I was eating carob. So it was,
It's not a good substitute.
You know,
some on the internet
it's
probably
something
so.
it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't chocolate.
Right.
And I also gave up shellfish. So I just had to give up everything. And, you know, like everyone else who discovers that they have this allergy, I started to look for products. And things that were in the supermarket were okay. They were kind of inferior to their like conventional counterpart, right? So like everyone's eating fresh baked Italian bread, and I was eating maybe sliced bread that was frozen for like 2 months in the supermarket. And it was a bit frustrating. And I've always been a bit of an entrepreneur. Like I always wanted to create my own business. And early on I was trying to write music, and I was writing song lyrics and trying to produce. And so this thing of this allergy led me to pursue making a cookie. I was like, what can I make? And I thought about Starbucks, right? Like they took the model of a coffee, like a cheap 50-cent coffee, and they made it into this amazing thing where now we go and we'll spend $5 or $6 on a cup of coffee and not even bat an eyelash. So I thought, what can I do that like someone would spend $1 and not even worry about it, not even think about it? And I thought a cookie would be the way to go. And I had found some really good flour blends. I found Pamela's flour, and I think it was for pancakes. And I really liked it, and so I started making cookies, and then for some odd reason I thought I wanted to make my own flour. Like, it wasn't enough that I was, buying her flour. I had to go and make my own. So then I started to research and read on, gluten-free flour recipes and finding books that tailored to that lifestyle. And I started to make my own flour blend, and I thought like a cookie was it, and I was for sure that was my golden ticket. And so I pursued that for a little bit, and I was actually selling cookies and brownies to local coffee shops here in Austin. And I was even at Whole Foods, but I was like working a full-time job, and I was trying to build a business, and I had a house and a mortgage, and I was exhausted, So I was doing all these things, and I thought, well, I need to survive. I need to like figure this out. And so I ended up letting go of the business and staying with what I was doing for my day job. I come from a creative background. I was doing graphic design, I was working in publishing, I was moving into like more management, and like I gave up on that and just pursued a traditional career. And then a few years later, I found myself just being miserable. Like I was back in New York, I was working for Saatchi & Saatchi. Things were going really well, but I was just not satisfied. And made my way back to Austin. It's just like a web of storyline, but like I ended up back in Austin working for some tech companies. And just like not satisfied. And somehow the bakery called me back. It was one of those things because I'm not classically trained. Everything that I've done has been self-taught. And I thought a baguette was the holy grail. And I thought for sure everybody wanted a baguette. And so in 2015, I created the LLC, pursued attending some farmers markets. I was even receiving some resistance there, because there are, I think with regard to pastries, there's a lot more successful companies doing gluten-free, even vegan pastries, but in the bread world, it just seemed like that was, I don't know, the stopgap, right, so to speak, or the bottleneck. No one was doing bread. And so I finally made it into one of the farmers markets here, SFC, which is Sustainable Food Corp, or Center, Sustainable Food Center. And they were downtown, and they almost rejected me. And I brought bread to them, and they were like, oh, wait a minute. You make bread, why don't you start the conversation with this? And I was like, I don't know. So they were enamored with it, and
as they should be. It's amazing.
And so for some reason, like the pun came out. So the name of the business is GFY Kitchen.
Yeah.
And so I like to play with it a little bit, and I get asked a lot what it means, and so I let everyone know it's just gluten-free yourself. Right? Or good for you, or it's gluten-free, y'all, knowing what they're potentially thinking. And, I kind of argue, like, if someone's serious about it, I let them know, culturally, it doesn't make sense to me, right? It could mean anything, right? Like, different mannerisms and colloquialisms just have different meanings in other countries. So I try to explain that, jokingly, that I don't know what they mean. Because on my tent, it says GF Yourself Kitchen. Yeah. And a lot of people understand it, like they laugh when they walk by, but it's a conversation starter, It's
a great brand.
So when I started that market, I was like, hey, can I have these things on my tent? Because I didn't know what the reception would be, and they laughed, and they loved it. So my tent says GF Yourself Kitchen, and when folks come by, they either laugh because they have an idea what it means, or they want to talk to me and find out what it is that I'm doing, what I'm pitching, and I'm always like, I'm not, I would never say anything nasty to you. I want to sell you my product. I want to engage with you. I want to have a conversation. Yeah. So it's a great segue for a conversation and to encourage people to at least try gluten-free foods, because there's still that stigma about it. Yeah. People turn their noses up at it, and it's an interesting position to be in. Yeah,
it's astonishing that, like I said at the beginning, bread, there's a stigma around it to think that it's not going to be good. Most of it's not good. Let's call it gluten-free. It's terrible.
Yeah.
And this is way better than normal bread.
Thank
It
you.
is astonishingly good. And it's like that, it's just confusing. You're like, why isn't bread made like this? Then it brings up a whole lot of questions. I think the next thing I want to talk about is like, do you have any like heroes or inspirations that drew you to do this? Because it's so unique and it's an interesting story that you came from not being classically trained and being this good at this it brings into question all of the other just basically normal bread and cookies and why they're not done like this. It's very confusing.
Yeah, I was a bit confused and still have a lot of debates with investor types and people that are interested in what I'm doing, because way back when and still to this day the argument is it's a very small niche market. They focus on people that have celiac disease, which is just one of many, allergy, what is the word? The things that affect our digestive system, right? Some people are allergic completely. Some people have an intolerance. Some people choose it as a diet, right? Because they know most processed foods that have gluten are just done poorly and lack nutrients and just don't have flavor or texture. So I think because the market was so small, there wasn't a lot of investment in serving that community. Right. And that's been something that I've been fighting for, which is why I do farmers markets, because it's an opportunity to get a fresh baked experience to the consumer, right? Anywhere you go, if you wanted something, if you want to get yourself a croissant, which is my next goal, you could pretty much go anywhere and it would have just come out of the oven an hour or two ago. But anything gluten-free would typically be frozen. And so I think there was a lack of awareness of what the market could grow into. And I mean, there are projections for it to continue to grow. And we're talking multi-billions, now. And I think if I can avoid sounding like a hater, the industry, the leaders in our industry are leaders because they were there first.
Yep.
And they own the market because they own distribution. They own all the channels. So they dominate.
Is there like a reason why that it wouldn't be scalable? Like, is there a reason why, like, for instance, is it just expense? Is it like, what is it that's the barrier of entry there?
Yeah, so there's a few, but the main one I would say is the financial resource, because you do need to be able to produce volume. And to just do a single run could probably cost you about $250,000 to be able to be in, say, 100 supermarket chains in just your local state. And then, you think about that as a quarterly run, so maybe by the end of the year you'd have invested $1 million in just doing the production, and then there's distribution channels, and then, competing against those that are already in the market, which I won't say their names, but, competing with them on their level, it's a big resource investment.
And there's no reason why it couldn't scale to that level. There's not actual, like, the ingredients are, there's no other reason other than these players are already in the game prior.
For the most part, everything we do is scalable. I think the only thing I've heard question about is our fermentation, because I do think there are stages in bread making, and this is, like, again, stuff that I've learned along the way, that some companies are cutting the timing, right? Because everything is a cost. If you ferment, then that means it has to sit in the refrigerator for a day, so that's a day of production that you're not getting out of your product. And so I think some companies they go straight from making the dough to putting it in the mold, baking it, and getting it out the door.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Which will also result in what sort of flavor, right? So the longer you can ferment, the richer the flavors that you're going to get out of your bread.
Man, it's so fantastic. Did we, was there any people, I don't know if we got to it because it's such an interesting story, but is there some heroes and inspirations that really did inspire the making of the business for you?
Well, now being older, I would often think of someone named Famous Amos, and he's known here for cookies. And then there's also Otis Spunkmeyer, and he's known, I think, for his muffins. And they're not in the gluten-free world, but it was just the fact that someone was able to achieve success later in life, right? Because we think, youth, that, you do it when you're 20 and, it's like it was fate, it was, meant for you. But some of us have a different path. I was doing the more traditional work life, 9 to 5, working in agencies and digital firms and pursuing graphic design and doing all those things. And this allergy, like I ate everything until I was 30. And it was at that point that I had to give up everything. So it just changed everything for me.
Yeah, yeah. So cool, such a great story. And like, I'm glad that in this case, you found a way of making that part enjoyable, because usually it's a sacrifice that you don't want to make. And the fact that it's like, because, I work out a lot and there's a lot of dietary restrictions that you'll do, or like short-term diets you'll do. Very restrictive, but for this to be so good, it's an absolute no-brainer. I think the next thing I also want to kind of let the audience know about is or give the audience insight and your fans, because they are religious. I met them at the farmers market. They absolutely love your stuff, and as they should. It's great. But is there stuff you like doing that's outside of baking, that you have like hobbies and some hobbies that you like to do that's outside of your business, so they get to know you a bit better?
Sure. I mean, I've always been into fitness. Like, that's been a big thing for me. Early on, it was a lot of like weight training and discovering the allergy through running, training for a marathon. So I've always stuck with that. I just enjoy the idea of, there's a character here called Jack LaLanne. So when I was a kid, I used to see my mom do exercise, like he was on television. And so I was like, that's how I'm gonna go out, like that guy. And not his onesie, he had like a was it a garage outfit, like a onesie kind of thing. But he was super fit, and I think he's still going, and he's like, 90 something, doing pull-ups like crazy. And I just think, if I'm blessed and I'm fortunate enough to grow old, like I want my body to be as healthy as possible. So I do enjoy fitness. For a long time I trained in Aikido. So I know that, it's easy to just fall into the sports thing, but like that was a very spiritual, process, because, you're doing these movements over and over again, and it's very meditative. And at the same time, you're learning something, right? You're learning how to defend yourself. You're learning how to maybe subdue someone from hurting you, and there's a lot of camaraderie in that. So yeah, it's always been like the physical activity. I used to like be a big roller skater. So just stuff like that. And I am big into UFC, so I watch a lot of that. And it's interesting, like most people think, oh, the violence, and it's not even that. It's like the idea of two people who train and prepare, right, like we do here, and they go into an arena, and it's less so much about them physically fighting, but more about them engaging in conflict, right? And life has problems and conflict, and it's like, how do we respond when we're on top, when you're in a winning position? And then how do you respond when life gives you the lemons, right? Yeah. Like, how do you recover from that, right? There are graceful ways to do either, and there are like probably less graceful ways to do that as well. So I tend to pull those stories out because it's challenging being a small business owner, in the grind, trying to find employees, trying to show up for your customers, and continue to believe in something when sometimes life is like, oh, maybe you should rethink this, and you're like, no, this is right, because I get those messages from my customers, right? You saw them, and I hear them, and it's like being at the market, I get that message, and it's always really encouraging. It's like, okay, so maybe this week wasn't the best for me, So what would they do if you lost the fight? It's like, okay, get back on that horse, and it'll be there.
Great message. Is there something you want to specifically promote? Because is there like a particular product or what's coming in the future?
It's coming in the future. So for us, like a lot of what we're doing, I have different avenues, different channels for us to be out in the public, right? So we have some places that carry us and resell us and distribute for us. We have some restaurants that carry us and they provide our product that way. We have a couple of stores that do it and sell it retail, but we do things like farmers markets and drop spots to try to bring that fresh baked experience to people. So I'm working on ways to be playful about that. We want to do a cookie night, so I'm trying to figure out a night to do, because there's companies here that deliver cookies to your home. So I want to try to do a night where we're doing cookies and coffee, and people would like order cookies and do the whole thing. Like I think there was a place in New York called David's Cookies, and who was the other one? There's a couple of cookie companies that would sell like just giant cookies, and I just remember that. And those are one of the things that like really inspired me, because like when we do cookies for cafes, they're always like the really large size. And right now we do the little ones, you know, because people are like, oh, I don't want to cheat on my diet, you know, like no, it's only 6 cookies, and so I'm ready to like, you know, bring out like big giant chocolatey cookies, and just like so you can, you know, like they just came out the oven, you know, instead of like, oh, I can't, you know, it's frozen. Or
I'm definitely there. I'm a big fan of cookies, so that'd be great. That'd be fantastic.
For sure.
Where can people find you online, and where can people find you in person as well?
For sure. So online we're at gfykitchen.com. And from there you can find ways to get us with our drop spots, which are a weekly pre-order. We work with Farmhouse delivery, and they'll deliver Austin, Dallas, Houston, San Antonio. Like I said, we're in a bunch of restaurants. So Tony C's is a pizzeria, 40 North, they're local, they're really good. Grove Wine and Bar. Wheatsville makes sandwiches on our bread. People's Pharmacy carries us retail. And so we're looking at partnering with a company called Milk Run and Vendor, and those will be like home delivery services. So it's you know, just trying to find ways to just make us, to normalize it, to make us on par with our conventional counters, right? So you won't suffer and be like, oh, I can only buy this cracker from this supermarket frozen, you know, so you can share bread with your family and it's like it was baked that day and it's super fresh. So just trying to find those outlets, and I think that's all of them. In the farmers markets right now, we work with Texas Farmers Market, and we're looking to expand to other farmers markets again, just to bring that fresh baked experience to those who don't have the same privilege that, you know, most of the world has right now.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, that's great. I truly hope that we can bring more exposure to your brand. It's
Definitely.
wonderful. People should try it. It is so fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This is a great opportunity for us. Thank you.
Awesome. Check out his stuff. Follow those links. Thank you so much for watching.